It is. We are live on YouTube.
Okay, great. This is the Marin Municipal Board of Directors Finance Committee meeting for November 12th. Apologies to anybody who is waiting. We're starting a couple of minutes late. I am calling the meeting to order, and we are adopting the agenda.
Right.
Do we have any public comment on any item that is not on the agenda at this time?
Chair Kohler, we have received six comments, and I forwarded that to you, and I will put it on our website later this afternoon.
Great. Thank you.
And they were non-agenda items.
Right, of course. That is what this moment is for. Okay, that's great. And we don't have any other comments from people attending virtually at this time.
I do not see any.
Great. Okay, that brings us to the regular calendar, and we need to approve the minutes of the prior Finance Committee meeting. I just want to check with council. Can Jack and I do that at this time, or do we need to wait for a third board member?
I think it's fine to accept the minutes unless there are changes or mistakes that were noted that then might call for action. I think otherwise it's fine to let them proceed.
Okay. Welcome, Director Russell. We were just about to adopt the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting of October 22nd. Do you have any changes or do you have any objections to our going ahead with that approval?
He's on mute.
Oh, he's on mute. Okay. We'll wait for him to sit down and check in. Jack, are you okay approving those minutes?
I'm fine.
Okay. And do we have any public comment on this item?
No, we do not.
Okay. I'm going to take it from Larry's.
I'm cool.
Okay, Larry's cool. We are approved for moving forward. The next agenda item is the monthly investment report.
Good morning, members of the board. Just to start off, I'd like to tell you that we will not be doing the financial update in this meeting. You probably noticed the reason for that was that we had a very quick turnaround from the last Finance Committee of 3 weeks. So we're not able to get the financials that quickly. So we'll catch up again in our December meeting. And plus, we had some pretty robust topics to talk about in today's Finance Committee. So on the investment report, really not much to tell you, pretty similar to what it was last month. One question came up from Director Bragman that we state within our report that the interest earned, that 140,371 was in October, just so the board understands that is through October. So that's for the 4 months of the year from July 1st to October 31, just to clarify on that. And other than that, there's really no major topics to discuss on the investment report.
Okay.
So on $82 million, we made 140,000. That's what you're saying?
Correct. Made 141,179. So that was
a good thing. We don't depend on that for our dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any public comments on this item?
No, we do not.
Okay. And Jack, I didn't mean to overlook you, but did you have any comments on this?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Okay. That, I guess that brings us to the third item, which is the CalPERS actuarial valuation report for 2020.
I have a quick question, Cynthia. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Chuck, on the yield curve, that's our yield curve? The one that's on the second page?
If you see the legend down below there, that yield curve that you're seeing the wave, is that 0.84? The portfolio is our return. And then down below, you're seeing treasuries. So it starts with 3 years going out to 5.
I see.
Treasury.
I see. So ours is fixed.
We're pegged to most of our portfolios in WAVE, so we're pegged to what WAVE is making.
And it doesn't change?
Oh yeah, it changes. Absolutely changes. So if you remember, Director Russell, last committee we talked about WAVE is basically. It's basically like a mutual fund. They're invested in a number of.
I understand. Yeah, I understand.
Agencies that we talked about. So it's going to change all the time based on what
I'm now understanding your curve. I wasn't following it before.
And the reason we show you the 5-year curve is we can't invest in anything over 5-year maturity.
Right.
I see. And isn't the yield curve inverted right now?
It was. I kinda looked at
It's not showing it in your curve.
was.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
what I find interesting, because I thought the yield curve was still inverted or had reinverted.
Yeah, based on our snapshot of the treasuries here as of October 31st, that is not inverted. That's a normal yield curve.
Got it. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the CalPERS actuarial valuation report.
Okay, great. So I'll ask the question I ask at the beginning of every meeting. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll talk a little bit about CalPERS this morning. I think it's a really important topic for the board to understand. You know, like any agency, it's one of the highest drivers of our personnel costs. As I'll show you, a lot of variables that go into that. This is the valuation report that we received over the summer. So just so you understand, PERS kind of operates on a lag. So
Kind of, you mean 2 years, yeah. Huh?
by 2 years, exactly. So the data that they has as of June 30th, 2019 will affect the rates that we're going to pay as of July 1st, 2021. So we're kind of looking back in time here a little bit when we look at the PERS valuations. So we're going to go over a couple of things, few definitions here. We'll talk about the assumptions that PERS makes. We'll talk about some performance, historical performance in PERS, and then we'll briefly just touch on some strategies that are available to us to address those PERS costs in the future. And one of those strategies the board's already taken with our stabilization fund. So a few definitions start off. This is a defined benefit pension plan. I know you all understand what that is. We're essentially guaranteeing a retirement benefit for employees in the future. And the way we kind of think about this in financial terms, you have defined benefit plans and you have defined contribution plans. So defined contribution plans like your 401 or 457, where the employer may fund it, you may fund it, or there may be a split. But the way to think about the difference between defined benefit and defined contribution is really who assumes the risk. So when we have a defined benefit pension plan, we as the employer, the district, are assuming the risk for that. So we are guaranteeing that we are going to pay you as an employee a certain amount for the rest of your life after you retire. And if their investment returns go badly for us, we shoulder that risk as a district. We're going to have to make up for that. And you'll see kind of how this works as we go through this presentation. And then there's the normal cost. So normal cost is really the annual cost of service for the upcoming fiscal year for active employees. So if you are on a 2.7 at 55 plan, which we have, and you work one more service year and you make $100,000 a year, that's $2,700 more dollars that we'll have to pay you in annual pension payments. So the normal cost, basically, the way to think about the normal cost is that assumes that everything goes exactly as PERS thinks it's going to go. They hit all of their actuarial assumptions, they make their investment returns, employees that retire are adhering to the mortality tables, everything's going perfectly, then you just have a normal cost. And in a perfect world, the cost that you would pay to PERS would be just that normal cost. Now we have that, the second piece of this is the unfunded accrued liability. So basically what PERS does, or the actuaries do, is they look out at what we have to pay for an employee in retirement. So you start here at 25 years old, you work to 55, you retire, and then you live until 80 years old, and we're going to pay you from 55 to 85 or to 80 years old. They go out and they look at what the cost of that benefit is. They pull it back to time zero, to today, and then they compare that to what the asset is. So if you've got a future liability for pensions of $100 million and you've got an asset of $90 million, then you're going to have an unfunded accrued liability of $10 million. Okay, and if it goes the other way, you're going to actually be superfunded. So that's, as you'll see, the unfunded accrued liability, that UAL, is something that we pay a lot of attention to because it's a really big driver of our PERS cost. We'll get into that here in a moment. And then what I'll show you later in the presentation is that that unfunded liability is made up of a bunch of amortization bases. So for example, every year now, if PERS assumes they're going to make 7%, if they make 6%, we technically have a loss of 1%. We've missed by 1%. They take that and they amortize it over 20 years. So every year now, whether we have a gain or a loss, we have a new amortization that is put in, and the composite of those amortization basis makes up that unfunded liability.
Mhm.
So this will be a little more clear when I show you an actual snapshot of how our unfunded liability is presented in the PERS report. And then PEPRA, you'll hear me throwing around that term a lot during this slideshow. The PEPRA is it's the Public Employees Pension Reform Act of 2013, and we'll talk about what that did. But that was basically after the crash. PERS realized that they had a problem. They were unfunded statewide. They really weren't catching up. So they implemented this Reform Act to do a number of things. So if you'll remember, one of the things now, you can't buy airtime. So before this act, you could go out and buy 5 years of airtime with PERS, which meant it was time you hadn't actually been in the pension system, but you could pay them for that time and buy 5 years of additional service years.
Mhm.
Got rid of that. They changed the way that we calculate final compensation. They got rid of spiking. They did a number of things in that Reform Act. Probably the biggest thing that has the biggest impact is they lowered the benefit for new members. And again, as we walk through this, you're going to see how that's actually having a positive effect for us, because what we call the PEPRA members, those who came into PERS after January 1st, 2013, earn a much less benefit than classic members who were in before that date. So they're much cheaper to us. They start bringing down that normal cost that we talked about. And then classic member is just someone who's not a PEPRA member. So that's somebody who was in the system before January 1st, 2013. So just talk briefly about actuarial assumptions. In order to kind of project how much that we'll need to fund our pensions for our employees in retirement, the actuaries have to make a number of assumptions. So one thing that you're all probably very familiar with is the discount rate. So discount rate, conversely, can be thought of the investment rate of return. So that's 7%. It was 7.5% a number of years ago. PERS board took action and they lowered that discount rate down to 7%. And the reason for that was that there is a lot of, the higher of a investment return that you have to get, the more risk you have to take. You have to invest in riskier and riskier assets. They're trying to de-risk the portfolio. And I'm going to show you a historical look at interest rates, and it'll pop out right away why this is a problem with risk in the portfolio, but they're trying to de-risk that. And then they have to make assumptions about things like salary and payroll. So they're going to assume that our salaries are going to increase by 2.75% per year. And that's important to them because the salaries are going to be what the final pension benefit is based on. 2.75 for us is probably pretty good assumption. Last year we had a COLA increase of 2.5%, and then you think about raises and other things that go into that. That's probably a fair enough assessment. And then they make assumptions for payroll growth. So again, that's also 2.75%. So they assume that our payroll is growing by 2.75% per year. Not sure that's as valid of an assumption. We probably aren't adding many people to our payroll every year. But again, these are assumptions that are applied to all agencies within the plan. We don't get unique assumptions for our district. And then they make demographic assumptions. So mortality rates, those are based on pre-retirement and post-retirement mortalities. And those are, broken down by age, by gender and all of that. So, the good news here is that the females continue to have better mortality rates. They live longer than us males. And the other good news here is that mortality rates, at least in the last 15 years, and I'd argue probably a much longer period than that, have been increasing. From a financial standpoint, though, that increase in that improvement in mortality rates where people are living longer is going to add cost to us for the pension plan because we're going to have to pay benefits for a longer time. And then they make assumptions about terminated members. So we have members that may work for us for a period of time. They may not vest. So you have to get 5 years of service to vest in CalPERS. It can be with multiple agencies or one. And if you don't hit that, PERS has to make assumptions. So if you don't vest, PERS just assumes that we give back the employee what they had paid into the system, because the employee is paying a contribution as well as the employer. So they give them back the employee portion, not the employer portion. And then if they actually exceed that 5 years, assumptions that they retire at a certain age. And then service retirement is going to vary by age, service, and formula. So the biggest component of the service retirement for the actuaries to assume the future cost of the benefit is what our formula is. So essentially we're 2.7% at 55 for classic members and 2% at 62 for PEPRA members. So as I mentioned, there's really two components to our required contribution. So the ARC is the annual required contribution. That's our annual payment to PERS. That's what we have to pay PERS. And it's composed of those two things that we talked about. One's the normal cost. So everything goes well, the cost of an additional service year for an employee, that's what we pay to PERS. And then we have this amortized cost. And the amortized cost is basically the cost of anything that varied from the assumptions. So if you have an investment gain or loss, that's going to get amortized over 20 years. And that's going to, if it's a loss, that's going to add to your annual required contribution. If it's a gain, that's going to decrease your annual required contribution of that ARC. So now, this chart looks a little bit complex, but it's really not. What's happening here is that we're taking those two components that we showed you here, the normal cost and the amortized cost, and we're looking at them through two lenses. The first up above here is percent of payroll. And then down here, it's the same information, but it's just converted into dollars. And what happened a number of years ago is PERS used to give us this in the reports as a percentage of payroll. Well, they continue to do that for normal costs, but they stopped doing that for the unfunded liability, because that really is a dollar amount, as you will see. So they said, you know, that really doesn't matter. I converted it here to percent of payroll just so you can see what the cost is of payroll. So our normal cost in 2022 is 10.2% of payroll. And then you add on to that the unfunded liability cost, that UAL payment, that's 32%. And you can see that that means overall, we're paying 42% for an employee as percentage of their salary as a benefit for them for that pension. So, you know, as I said before, the PERS benefit is going to be the biggest driver of our personnel cost. A couple of things that you can see are bright points here. If you run your eyes across this first column here, the normal cost as a percent of payroll, you can see it's going down. So it starts at 2.2% or 10.2% in 22, and it's dropping down 9.2% in 26. The reason that's happening is like I mentioned before, we have those PEPRA employees, those cheaper employees. So as new employees join the district that have never been part of PERS, they're much cheaper and they're starting to bring down our normal costs. You can see that the unfunded liability isn't quite playing along as much, and that's because the unfunded liability has different drivers to it. You know, like I said, primarily what's going to be driving that you'll see is losses in PERS. And by losses, I don't even mean that they lose money. It's how much they miss that 7% target by. There's a 7% assumption, they hit 6%, that's a loss of 1%. And then down below, I just show you that in dollars. So the normal cost is about $2.6 million per year right now. And then with the unfunded liability payment, that's $8.1 million for a total of $10.7 million in 2022. And then you can see the trajectory of this over time. And you can see that those numbers start to add up quite a bit. I mean, you're increasing by about $1.3 million there from 2022 to 2026. So I mentioned to you that our PEPRA employees are increasing. So this is a look back to 2017. So you can see that this miscellaneous first level, or what we refer to as the classic employees, those made up 175 of the active employees in 2017. And we had 53 that were those new PEPRA members that have that cheaper benefit. You can see as we've gone over time, that's gone from 53 to 76 on the PEPRA side, while the classic members start to fall. So now we're at 151, 76. And McYoung actually went in and pulled the data for this year, and we're already up to about 90 PEPRA members. So this is good news for us. This continues to bring down our costs. And then down below there, I just show you, they kind of blend these rates to give you that overall normal cost. So you can see the classic members here, they're about 20% in normal cost, but PEPRA, the PEPRA level employees, the new employees, are about 12.3% in normal cost. So that shows you how much cheaper they are. And I should mention here, when I showed you this, you see 10.2% in normal cost, and here you're seeing a much higher level. That's because, keep in mind that the employee pays a portion of theirs. So this 19.91% here and this 12.3, those are gross. That's the employee and the employer's portion. So that's the total normal cost. So let's switch now and look at some history of how we've done with PERS. So this is the historical funded status for the district. And you can see here in 2010, we were at 62%. So that's probably about the time we're probably beginning to exit the Great Recession. 2011, we improved to 68%. We kind of bounce along here, and we're back at 63% in 2019. So we're really basically where we've been for 9 years. We're pretty much stable. I put up there in the upper right that CalPERS average for 2019 is 70.4%. So that means statewide, if you took everybody, they average about 70% funded status, and we're at 63%. So just based on averages, we're a little bit behind where the state is. And then here I'm giving you a view of the same thing, but this is the unfunded liability that's going to affect that funded status. So this is in dollars. So you can see if you flash back to the same time period to 2010, we were $61 million in unfunded liability. And then as you flash forward to 2019, we have $103 million in unfunded liability. So that's a pretty marked increase. Couple things that happened there, though. If you recall, PERS, they went through a 5-year ramp up because they were looking at that funded status of about 70% statewide. And they realized that we're never going to catch back up to 100% funded. So what they did was they just ramped up everybody's rates over a 5-year period. And some agencies saw up to a 50% increase in that ARC, that annual required contribution, just based on that ramp up. And then the other thing you'll probably recall is that several years ago, to de-risk the portfolio, PERS decided to reduce that target investment rate from 7.5% to 7%. Well, as they did that, that's caused our unfunded liability to go up. So some of this is just actions that PERS has taken. It's not necessarily that we've done anything wrong or that we've had investment losses. These are just actions that PERS is taking to get themselves back to a healthy status. And those are all good things, I think, from a financial standpoint. I think for many years, PERS was kind of ignoring the problem. If you go back to the 1960s, the PERS assumed rate of return was 4%. And then as you got into the late 90s and early 2000s, that went up well over 8%. So it's almost kind of like they were fixing their problem with optimism. And nobody ever thought that markets were going to have a comeuppance. So I think they've gotten more realistic about that. I also think they're very concerned. They're sitting at 70% statewide, and the actuaries will tell you that if the funded status ever got to 50% across the plan, in their words, it is unrecoverable. Not sure what that means. Not sure we want to find out. But they're realizing that they've taken all of these actions, and really the funded status has maybe marginally improved, but they really haven't moved the needle much. So PERS is now paying a lot of attention to this problem, and they're starting to take it very seriously. But to take it seriously, that means that it's much more costly to the agencies that are involved, and you can see that here in our unfunded liability, the increase in that over the years. Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit earlier about the volatility and the risk that PERS is exposed to in trying to get this 7% return, or previously 7.5% return. So here I'm just kind of showing you what their historical investment returns look like. So this red line here is 7%. Okay, that's the target. And then these blue bars here show you what their actual experience was. So you can see that in You look at 2011, we had a 21% return on assets. It was a fantastic year. The next year, 2012, we had a 1% return.
Wow.
So this is a really, really, really volatile pension asset. And that's a problem when you're handling, $400 billion in assets and, you lose 6%, 7% a year. That's a big problem. It's hard to get back. And, the way the math works on that, if you lose 50%, you have to make a lot more than 50% to get back to where you were. So the point here is that this is really whipsawing PERS. And down below here, so I circled here in 2015, you had a 2.4% return. Well, back then the actuarial assumption for returns was 7.5%. So they missed there by 5.1%. You say, okay, well, that doesn't sound like that big of a deal, 5.1%. Well, you can see down below, this is what the effect of that experience was on the district. So the return was 2.4%, or we missed by 5.1. That means that unfunded liability that I showed you here, these numbers, that added $11.1 million to that unfunded liability in 1 year because of that loss. So again, as you start dealing in numbers of this magnitude, it really can start having a big effect on you. And the payment on that is $732,000 per year spread over 20 years. So the other thing to kind of look at, there's a lot of discussion ongoing with PERS about what the correct assumed rate of return is, the investment rate of return. So, a lot of people will say that 7% is too high, that we really need to bring that down even lower. So it's kind of interesting to look back on PERS experience through different windows. So if you look at the 1 year return here, 6.7% would indicate 7% is probably, about in the ballpark. The 5 year return dips below 6%. You look at 20 years, you're at 5.8%. But then if you look at a 30-year return, you're at 8.1%. So it kind of depends on what window you look through as to whether you think that 7% is a correct rate of return or not. But the fact is, the lower that you get that target rate, the less risky assets you can invest in. So maybe you transition to where you're more invested in bonds rather than equities and REITs and things that have high returns but very high risk associated with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked a little bit about the actions that PERS has taken. So in 2012 and 13, they adopted, and this was actually a state law, Assembly Bill 340, the PEPPER reform. So they did a number of things that we talked about a little bit before. They changed the formula for everybody to miscellaneous at 2% at 62. So it used to be for classic members that all different agencies had different formulas. They were kind of all over the place. This normalizes everybody. So any new employee that comes in and has never been PERS, whether they're going to work for the city of San Rafael or the Marin Municipal Water District, they're getting 2% 62. That's everybody. The maximum benefit, so they actually peg that to Social Security, and so they cap you. And then there's things like airtime. I talked about you used to be able to go back and buy time that you hadn't actually served. They got rid of that. And then they changed the basis of the benefit. Used to be on your final year or your highest year. So what they did was change that so that they average your final 3 years now, so that take some of the gamesmanship out of it. You can't spike your pay in 1 year. They're going to go and average those. So those are all, I think, good things. And then I talked about the 5 year ramp up that they also adopted in fiscal year 12-13. And then more recently in 16-17, they voted to reduce that discount rate. So here, sorry to give you an eye chart here, but I wanted to kind of pull the actual table of our unfunded liability out of the report and show you how this thing's composed. So you see at the bottom line here in red, I've circled it. That's that $103.1 million in unfunded liability that we have. And then up above here, you see all of these lines. Okay, these are those amortization basis that we defined in the beginning of the presentation. That's what these are. So we talked about 2015. You go back, we had this loss, and you can see the payment of $732,000 that we talked about, and we're amortizing this over a number of years. Now I told you that you amortize gains and losses over 20 years. That's new policy. PERS used to do it over 30 years. And actually, when we went into the Great Recession and they had that 25% loss, they actually did what was called a 30-year rolling amortization, which basically meant it was like making the minimum payments on your credit card. So they've since gotten rid of those types of things, and they've kind of forced everybody to really face the music when you have a loss, or you get the benefit when you have a gain. So now you see every year now, we're going to have a gain or a loss. And some of these, like you'll see in 2018, we had a gain. So that actually brings down your amortized costs. You can see there's a credit there for $414,000 per year. That actually brings it down. So we're going to continue to have these every year. Sometimes they'll be positive, sometimes they'll be negative. But you can see how all of these things stack up over time. All these amortizations stack up to give us that $103 million of unfunded liability. So then that brings us to potential actions that we can take. And like I said, the board's already taken one. We have a stabilization fund of $2 million that's in place. You can pursue something called a Section 115 trust. It's irrevocable. So it has to be used for PERS. The money cannot come out. One of the benefits of the Section 115 is that you can actually invest in riskier assets like equities. So, with our investment portfolio for the district, we're restricted by the state. We can only invest in largely relatively risk-free assets like bonds. We're restricted as to what we can invest in. This allows you more latitude. You can also do what's called a fresh start. So you could go back to PERS and take this entire $103 million and say, we want to amortize this over X number of years. And you say, we want to do a 30-year amortization. You can do that. It's the only downside of that is once you do it, it's done. You can't unring that bell. So you can't go back to PERS and change that amortization scale. You are committed to that once you do it. You can also take pension obligation bonds. I've seen a number of agencies that have done that. I don't recommend that. You're going out and borrowing money in the bond market and putting it into, as we've seen, a much riskier asset. So you're taking a lot of risk there, and you are now on the hook for 30 years for those bond payments. So I don't recommend that. Actually, the Government Finance Officers Association came out years ago, and they also recommend against doing pension obligation bonds. The other thing that you can do is you can target specific amortization lines. So you can go back to your table here, and for example, you could look here where we have a $3.9 million amortization. We have 12 years remaining on it. But let's say that we took our $2 million out of the pension stabilization fund, added some money to that, or just paid down $2 million of this. But let's say we could wipe this out. Well, now you've just gotten rid of 12 years of payments at $370,000+ per year. That kind of allows you a savings in the annual required contribution. And what you can do is take that savings and then start paying down other line items. So it's just something that I've used in the past that I think works pretty well. But you're not going to take care of a $103 million unfunded liability, and it's going to be a decades-long strategic approach to it. I think also over time, those actions that PERS have taken are going to, I hope, are going to start to fix this problem. And then one that I didn't put up here, potential actions. It's what I call the nuclear option. I mean, you can terminate the plan, but that's very expensive. So for us to terminate, could be as much as $253 or $353 million. It's a really expensive option. Basically, what they do is they take the future benefits for those employees and they, assume an annuity at 1.5%. So that money's basically put in annuities and it's there for those pensioners in the future. So it's not something I recommend there either. But these are some of the things that we're looking at. We're working on the 10-year financial forecast. So we told you one of the things we're looking at is pensions. So these are some of the options that we'll be kicking around and that we'll be bringing back to the board during the upcoming budget discussion and as part of that 10-year plan. And again, anything that we do here is going to be very long-term plan. This isn't something that we're going to take care of immediately. So that is that's my presentation on PERS. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a question actually on those potential actions, and you said you're looking at them. Are we moving forward to be able to isolate one or two and have staff make a recommendation to the board? We think you should do a Section 115 trust or whatever.
We are working on that, Director. But one of the things that we're doing is we're looking at this and comparing it with all the other things that we're going to be looking at in the 10-year plan. So all of this stuff is a matter of money, really, and where you want to put those resources. So yeah, we will absolutely have recommendations, but we may find that it's more important to pursue rangers on the watershed, or some improvements to our treatment plants, or some of those things may come out higher than it would come to taking millions of dollars and putting it towards PERS. So yeah, we're definitely looking at what the options are. But then probably the bigger question is going to be what the size of those options are. So how much do we want to put towards PERS, or are other priorities going to
Right.
Preempt it?
Right. And can I interpret from that no action is on the list as well in terms of potential? Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, Director, you could make an argument that, look, PERS has taken all of these actions. They've lowered the discount rate. They've ramped up the annual required contribution. They've fixed a lot of the problems that we had with the old pension plans, where you could have spiking, you could buy airtime and all these things. I mean, they've done all these things. So, you could kind of take an attitude that, let's give that some time and see what those fixes do. And in the future, I would imagine PERS isn't done at 7%. I would not be surprised at all. And they've kind of foreshadowed that they're going to look at bringing that down again. So, as they start to bring that discount rate down and de-risk that fund, maybe there's less pressure on us to address this problem immediately. But I think, we've already taken some action. We have the stabilization fund. Well, maybe having $2 million in the stabilization fund, maybe that's money we could use to go after one of these amortization bases, or, maybe there's a better use for the existing money that we have.
Well, I don't think there's any question about that, Chuck. I mean, if we're earning 140,000 on 82 million, the money we're earning essentially zero on 2 million. I think we should, as you and just for everybody's information, Chuck and I have been having this conversation for a while, and I think there's two basic approaches that I see, which is to retire the old debt or retire the new debt. In other words, the second approach, which Chuck didn't mention, is we could just stay current. In other words, don't allow any more accumulation of the amortizations, to just pay them off when they occur. So that's a second strategy. I think we need a recommendation, Chuck, on one, what to do with the 2 million. Two, how much we should be contributing to the stabilization fund per year. And I understand these are all balls up in the air, but I think it's important that we establish the priorities. So I don't think a no action approach, Jack, is suitable from my thinking.
No further action would be a better way to state it. We're already doing the stabilization fund, so we are taking some action. So
yes,
the new item on the list would be no further action. For example, the Section 115 trust sounds very intriguing to me. But again, you got to look at the whole picture, and along with the stabilization fund, would we want to do that? I don't know. And what I'm really saying is, obviously, we need some direction there.
Yeah. See, the 115 doesn't sound interesting to me at all.
Why?
Because that's exactly what CalPERS is doing, right? I mean, the real problem here isn't what we're doing; it's what CalPERS is not doing, which is making their goal. And Chuck, I hear you. Let's just say CalPERS dropped to 6.75. Well, then that increases our normal contribution, correct? It reduces the you know, if they let's say they lower this to whatever their average, their real average is. Let's say it's 3%. I don't know what the actual number is. It was hard in your curve to look at that, but then they would stop missing their mark, but we would have to make up the difference on the normal contribution, huh?
Yeah, so if they decrease the discount rate again, you know, you're going to see something like you see here. So, you know, you see between 17 and 19 there, you can see this increase in the UAL. A lot of that's likely due to decreasing that interest rate. So the UAL, it won't affect your normal cost, but that UAL will increase if they take down the discount rate again. But again, it's kind of temporary pain, because the other side of that is like you mentioned, that means that they can now invest in less risky assets. So their odds, the lower they get that discount rate, the higher the odds are of them hitting it, and the lower the volatility is going to be, because they're going to be
Of course. Are you sure about that not increasing the normal? Because if they don't make the money, then we have to put the money in, right? If they don't make the return on the money we're putting in, then we'd have to make that up. So, wouldn't that come out of the normal?
No. So remember, the way the normal cost is derived is from those actuarial assumptions we talked about. The first one I showed you was an economic assumption of the investment return.
Yes.
So that will just change that assumption. That won't change the normal cost. That doesn't mean that we have to invest more.
Okay. Well,
it gets
I still think we should be looking at the discussions that you and I've had, Chuck, about do we deal with the old ones or the new ones, and then how much we should be dealing with per year, to the extent we can.
Yeah.
So it seems to me, if I could, that there's two options at play for us. I mean, there's a whole suite, but the two would be the model that we have, which is reserves, and perhaps adding to it and using those reserves to not have a spike were they to miss their target, right? And the reserve would stabilize our costs in those cases, or use the reserves to pay down line items that Chuck went through. Seem to be the place. And what Chuck noted and will do as part of the 10-year financial plan, in context of all of our opportunities and costs that we have, bring to the board some recommendations probably along those lines, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
And
just to take a minute, Larry, I just want to take a pause, say thanks to Chuck. This is really well laid out. I think we've all been aware for some time. I mean, this PERS conversation and the pension conversation is one we've been having, really for decades. And I think to the point that Larry Russell made, very much of this is obviously outside of our control. It's kind of really, we're sort of at the whims of what PERS decides to do here and how well they perform. So having this all laid out, I think, is enormously valuable, in particular for the public. So one quick thing, is this going to be going on the website? Is this going to be made available? I don't see that we have a lot of public participation today.
It will be on the website, and we do have one public comment.
Okay, so we'll get to that in just a second, because the second point I was going to make is that I think Chuck's approach, and I think, Ben, you're agreeing with him, is that looking at this in the context of our financial planning overall, I think is the right approach. I mean, Larry, I totally agree with you that, there's different ways to go. I think Ben's point about, the two models makes a lot of sense. Chuck, I appreciate you putting up the straw man nuclear and, non-recommended options just so we can have them, but I don't want to have a lot of time spent on those. I think there's a lot of consensus. We don't want to go in either of those directions. So it does seem to me that really homing in on the options that do make sense, but in that broader context, is the way to go. So that leads me to my question, which is, what do you see the timing on that? When do you expect to be having a more comprehensive conversation with us about, the finances, the 10-year financial plan, and where addressing this issue could fit in? I mean, I am heartened that the reforms that were made to PERS in 2013 do seem to be, we're starting to see them kicking in. At least that's my understanding from your presentation, Chuck.
Yeah.
I think we'll be bringing the 10-year financial plan, the kind of the meat of it in the first quarter of the upcoming year. And
Okay.
that we're planning for that to dovetail into the budget process as well.
Okay, that's good. And then should we go to our one public comment?
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Roger Roberts.
Hey, Roger.
You're on mute, Roger.
I've
Oh, there you are. Oh,
No, he's still muted. There you go.
There you go. Oh, Mr. Roberts, you're mute again.
but now I'm unmuted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning. I don't know if this is helpful to you, but my own personal belief is that the 7% target is not going to be something that they will be able to achieve over time. It'll be considerable volatility. And as they move towards lower risk assets, that makes it even harder to reach the 7% target. So my question is, do you think as a board that it would be wise to increase the stabilization fund in order to have money at hand in order to deal with the swings that's going to happen at PERS?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the options. I think, I think we're all agreeing with you that hitting that 7% is problematic. And I believe that increasing the stabilization fund is one of the options that Chuck has laid out here that we'll be considering. We were just talking about doing that in the broader context of our financial planning overall. But Chuck, did you want to address that?
Yeah, I think having the stabilization fund is providing you some good protection against the volatility. I mean, that was the whole purpose of it. And increasing that is not a bad idea. But again, all of this is really a discussion about where the district is comfortable with the risk. So putting money within our district portfolio, which is you pointed out is sub 1%. It's very safe. We control it. There's very low risk in that. If we go out and we put more money into PERS, then we start to bring down that liability. We start to increase our funded status. I think we can, take strategies where we pick off one of those amortization basis and we can kind of use that to create a wedge so we can continue using those savings to pay down more. But, again, as a discussion of risk, every time that you put more money into PERS, you're putting more money at risk. So if we went in and we paid down our unfunded liability by $10 million, we've now increased our asset by $10 million. And now if you have a year where you have a 20% loss, you're going to lose $2 million additional because you funded that more. So again, this is all, it's all weighing what our risk is and what risk we're comfortable with as a district.
Yeah, and those are very hard to define, huh? Both of those
That's
are.
the art in this. That is the art in this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The other thing,
yes, they are hard to define, but you need to make that definition, and that's what I'm suggesting.
agree, Roger. The other thing, Chuck, that I think needs to be explained better is the bond issue. And I heard what you said. I'm not sure I have my arms around paying down 10 million, they lose 2 million, and you lose 2 million of your 10 million. It seems to me that we really need a spreadsheet that lays this all out mechanically. So if you pay this, if you were to pay the liability down today, what does it do in return on investment moving out? And I think that the bonds, for instance, from just a simple-minded approach, the 7% that we pay CalPERS is actually their number of their projected return on investment, correct, on the amortization?
Yep.
So if they change that to 675, that number changes to 675. So in essence, we're guaranteeing CalPERS' performance without choice, right? Because they're saying we need to make 7% on your money. So we're making 7% by paying it down over time on the amortization. If they fall $1 million short, we make up for it because they charge us the difference between what they get and the 7%. So they're basically forcing us into paying that. So if we can buy a bond at 2% or 3% or 4%, as opposed to 7%, you know, I think that needs to be explored a little more. And you and I have had this conversation, Chuck. I know about the market timing and all those kinds of issues. But on the flip of that, I think it needs to be clearly laid out as to what the cost benefit is of retiring the liability today, you know, by at a rate that's lower than the rate that CalPERS is charging us.
Yeah, that's a longer discussion. But you know, you have to remember that again, you go out and you float a bond for $100 million, let's say, which that would be very difficult to do. But let's say we did that, we paid up the unfunded liability. You're fully funded now. You have an additional $100 million in there. But again, now, I mean, I showed you that slide that shows what the investment return volatility is. You know, that it's when you look at that unfunded liability, it's a snapshot in time. That's as of June 30th. But the next year, when you have a loss and you miss that target rate of 7%, you're going to have an unfunded liability again. You're going to have a new amortization base that comes in. So, you know, a lot of this is going to be timing. And honestly, I've been with two agencies that have used pension obligation bonds, and it could just be unfortunate timing. But you know, if you look back at their performance, you wouldn't be able to tell they ever paid down that unfunded liability. So it just depends on how much you want to take. You go out and you borrow money using a risk-free asset like a bond. You commit yourself to 30-year fixed payments, and then you take that and put that into a pension asset that is invested in highly volatile investments. You know, you just have to be really clear about what you're doing there. It's a risky scenario, and that's I think why the GFOA came out years ago and recommended against pension obligation bonds.
But again, I think you have to look at the dynamics of the situation today as well. I mean, it's fine to take advice from the past, but we need to look at what actually performance is and what's anticipated. You know, one has to believe that something is going to happen at CalPERS, that they won't allow CalPERS to fail. I would think the state has to do something. So I don't know what the state's plan is. I think that would be a question for the governor's office that probably is worth asking, although it may not be a good answer, but it can't hurt to ask.
They actually do have an answer.
What's the future?
Paying down their liability. They actually have been paying down their liability in previous years when they had surpluses. That's part of what their actions were.
Is the CalPERS dominated by state employees, dollar wise? Or do you know the percentages? I mean, is it mostly state employees or it's mostly people like us?
Oh, the allocation of the active members.
Yeah,
I don't know what the allocation is of that.
Could you take a look at that when you get a chance? And also, would you be kind enough to send the slides to the board folks?
Yeah, absolutely.
And one more comment. It would have been very helpful to have the slides before the presentation. So in the future, if that's possible.
Okay.
It's a lot of information to absorb real time. But an excellent job.
Yeah, I can you guys hear me? Sorry.
Loud and clear.
I was having challenges with my mute button. So yes, I thought it was great. I will suggest, Chuck, that maybe a little bit of work with Jeannie on slides to make sure we can actually see the little microscopic numbers would be good. But I think overall, it's very important that you have laid out these options for us. Again, we have been very much aware of and on top of the pension issues for quite some time. So I'm glad we're moving in the
right.
PERS reforms are starting to provide some meaningful benefits. So I think really, again, just folding that into our overall financial planning is really the way to go. With that, if we don't have any further comments on this, I'd like to move on to the next item, which is resuming normal billing procedures.
Here.
Who is on point for that one?
Chuck is, I think he's pulling
That
out
would be
his
me.
presentation.
Sorry, I'm just trying
Oh,
to.
okay.
Can
No problem.
you still see my screen?
Yes, see you.
No, we don't see the screen. No.
We don't
do
see
not
your
see this?
screen. We don't see
No,
your
you-
screen, no.
Okay, sorry. How about
How
now?
do we see you?
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, so this next topic is, we're calling it resuming normal water billing procedures. And this is kind of a look at what happens as we, hopefully start to exit this COVID event. I've got on the line with us Colleen Kanzaki, who's our customer service manager, and Colin Horton, who's one of our analysts, has done a ton of work on this. You'll see some data in here that he's worked on providing us. So I'll lead the discussion here, but I've got some experts on here who are much better versed in this than I am. So just an overview of where we've been. On March 13, 2020, the board suspended terminations of service for non-payment. And then a few weeks later, April 2nd, the governor came out and suspended water shutoffs. And then on May 5th, the board took action to help out our customers who were feeling the financial stress of this event. And the board did took a number of actions. They accelerated the summer rate structure. They brought it up from June to May to give people an extra month of the summer CCF usage. We delayed the rate increase from July 1st to January 1st. That 4% increase that was supposed to go into effect. And then they also directed staff to look into some potential alternatives that we could have for payment plans for our customers. So you've seen these statistics before. So these are 60-day past due customers. We have total customer accounts of about 61,000 in the district. So these were delinquencies. As of October 1st, 2020, we had 6,381 accounts that were more than 60 days delinquent for a total of $1.8 million. And then just by way of history, looking at what a normal year's delinquencies would be, we look back to October 2019-18, and you can see that those delinquencies are much lower in terms of accounts and in terms of dollars. So we're definitely seeing the effects of COVID on our delinquencies. And then one of the things that Colleen and Colin did a lot of work on was they took this data and plotted it using GIS to see if we could kind of identify, how this was scattered among the district's geographic area. So this plot here is actually looking at accounts that are 90 days or more past due, and you see two colors in there. You see the blue and the red. So the red is what we call frequent delinquencies. We're kind of trying to delineate between those who, more currently have delinquencies. So here the definition was people who had 3 or more unpaid invoices going back to January of 2018. And then we had infrequent delinquencies, which were 2 or less unpaid invoices going back to this last October. So basically, essentially what we're looking at here is the blue dots are, for lack of a better term, kind of our new delinquent customers. So the blue dots we would think would be those who are really being affected or not paying their bills specifically because of the COVID event. As we kind of run our eyes over that, you can see that there's no real patterns that break out. It's pretty evenly dispersed. To the right there, you can see the different cities. Out of those 2,750 total delinquent accounts, that includes those who are more frequently delinquent over the years and those who are kind of new delinquencies. You can see how that's spread out over the county. And then to kind of put that in a little bit of context, we broke it down again by how many total accounts are there. And what you kind of see there is that it seems that the delinquencies pretty closely mirror, what the population of accounts is within those cities. So that seems to be the way it's falling out. So you don't see anything really breaking out there as far as how those delinquencies are distributed. And then we'll talk here a little bit about our normal collection procedures or dunning procedures. So generally, and we've suspended all of these right now at the board's direction. So generally, you kind of step through this process. You have a late payment charge, you get a past due notice, then we give you an automated collection call, we go to final notice, and then ultimately, if this is not resolved, it results in shut off notice. And then if accounts are closed, then they move to that collections tier down here. And that's where we start with what we call a soft letter, which is just a reminder that your account has been closed. We need you to take action on paying that. And then if that is ignored, the next thing you get is a harsh letter, which basically gives you a 15-day notice to pay. And then if that isn't minded, then it goes to collection agency. And then ultimately, if we decide that account is non-collectible, then the account's written off, and we write that off as bad debts on our books. So as we kind of look at this in terms of the arrearages and our processes, we're kind of grappling with what to do with those who are in arrears and are going to need some help going forward. So one of the proposals that staff has come up with is to offer people automated extended payment plans. So essentially, we go out and pick a threshold level. So we picked $60 here. So if you're $60 or more in arrears, you would automatically be put into a repayment program that would extend over 2 years. So that'd be 12 billing cycles. So $5 a billing cycle, and that would get you caught back up over that longer term. The plans would be automated. Do that modification in our system, create those plans, but then we give customers that option to opt out of it. So some people may not want to have that 24-month repayment plan. Maybe their condition, their outlook is improved. They're employed again, or whatever happens. Individuals are going to have individual circumstances, and maybe they don't want to opt into that plan. There's a couple of things that we have to grapple with going forward. Right now, district code, the way it's spelled out is that our payment plans or alternative payment plans can exceed 12 months. And then you get, one of those per year. So obviously, if we're going to offer plans that go over that 12-month period, then we're going to have to address this with the district code. And I think initially there was some thought that we might be able to do this via resolution. I'm not sure that's the way that legal is leaning right now. But either way, we are going to have to come back to the board at a board meeting to address this specific issue. Some of the things that this brings to the surface is, we're trying to identify like what a trigger is. Ultimately, really, the trigger is going to be board action. We're going to have to come to the board to, modify this district code and implement this plan. So that really will be the trigger. Some things that, we're kind of monitoring to determine when we get to that time when we can bring this to the board and start implementing this plan is, what the status of the state shelter-in-place order is. We've got a Marin County risk reduction order. When that expires, that will probably give us some indication. We have our tier assignments. So when I was doing the slides here, it was at moderate. There's one tier that is better than that. And then just looking at local economic conditions. So, all of this there's no one way to kind of develop a trigger that starts. I think it's going to be a kind of a scan of the local environment that tells us when we can start kind of thinking about resuming our normal billing procedures. And when we do that, then that triggers this automated repayment plans for our customers. So we just kind of spelled out here for you a sample timeline once we go back to normalizing. So at time 0, we'd have to go to the board, get approval, and then we would generate repayment plans and send out notice to customers about what we're doing. About 2 months after that, our tentative plan would be to resume our lower level dunning processes. So, we might implement late charges again, past due notices, but we wouldn't be going to things like shut off notices and shut offs. And then at some point, 4 months or more down the road, then we could start looking at resuming those higher order dunning procedures and start bringing our billing procedures back, to total normal. Again, this is just a sample timeline of how we think this might roll out. But some of those things like shutoffs, that may, we're a little bit of behest of what the state does there. We can't do shutoffs right now, and we may not be able to do those for quite some time. So all of this is going to be a little bit flexible. So that's my presentation on that. As I mentioned, I've got Colleen and Colin on the line too. Can you help me out? Board
So thanks, Chuck. That's really helpful. Just a couple of quick points. I'll just say for myself, I definitely want us to be taking shutoffs, continue to have those off the table. I just think this is, we are not out of this situation yet. So I understand the need to resume procedures in some way, but I think that we are not yet at the point where we need to be thinking seriously about resuming shutoffs. That's, just where I'm at. The other question I have is, you were on the triggers for starting to collect debt. Those aren't bad, but what have we done, if anything, so far to reach out to the 2,700 or so folks who are in arrears? I think that some kind of, let's put it out there. Would you guys be open to some kind of outreach or polling or surveying? Because I think getting a sense from those, those folks about their situations, and their ability to start becoming involved in one of these programs would be another piece of the pie. And I don't know if Jeannie, if you've got thoughts about that one way or another, but there are any number of ways we can do some sort of survey along those lines.
Yeah, we're actually working on a survey to give us a better understanding of these customers who are in arrears and to just help us have additional information so we can make an informed decision. So we're working on that as we speak, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great. I would definitely add that to the list of triggers, because for some people, they're still going to be in a very challenging situation, others perhaps less so. So I think, having a clearer understanding. The good news is it's a relatively small, a very small actually percentage of our accounts. So that's good, but we do want to be in a situation where we're operating with, with sensitivity and with as clear a sense of the situation and information as we can possibly get.
Am I correct in understanding that we have suspended everything on your chart, right? We're right now doing essentially nothing.
That is correct.
Are we even sending out late notices, or not even doing that?
I don't think we're even doing that. Colleen, weigh in if I'm incorrect in that, but we're not doing any notices right now.
Okay.
Although, Chuck, isn't there a notice on the bill that there's a past due amount?
Yes, so customers are not receiving any additional notices, past due notices, collection calls, or any activity outside of their regular bill. If they do have a past due amount on their regular bill, it is reflected on that bill.
Okay.
So Jeannie, when you're doing the survey, that might be one of the first questions, is to ask whether people are actually aware that they're past due.
Right, and the survey will actually be targeted in a way that we're surveying that specific sample and set.
Yeah, I assumed you were only surveying that sample set. I'm just saying that part of it should be like, do you know? Because, my guess is that people who are really in distress aren't paying that much attention to their water bills.
Good point.
Yeah, I also want to agree with Cynthia. I don't think we're ready yet to actually notch it up in terms of actually collecting. But I also think it is a good idea we're laying out a plan here. But I think we should not approach it one suit fits all. I think there should be some flexibility in there, because different things will be more appropriate for different people. And I think we have to give our staff actually a little bit of discretion in here of actually making some on on the spot decisions with some of these people, which way to go with it to negotiate different solutions. Yeah.
I have a question, Chuck. Do you have a distribution by tier level of the outstanding amounts?
I do not.
Could you get that for us? Because, I mean, one way to think about this would be to say, okay, guys, you know, pay the tier 1 level, because everybody has to pay the tier 1 level.
Yeah.
And then give us some flexibility on the upper tiers. If it turns out a lot are in the upper tiers, if a lot are in the lower tiers, then it's a different animal. But I'd like to see that as soon as you can get to it, to give us a feel for and I think, Jeannie, you need to look at that in terms of your survey issues too, as to where these folks are in terms of the tier system.
Yeah, I think that is a good idea, but I do think we should anticipate that the majority of these people will be in the lower tiers. There's generally a fairly strong correlation between income and, you know, being in the lower tiers as opposed, you know, higher income, higher tiers. I mean, not perfectly, of course, but I think we can. I don't know, Chuck, you might. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of you, but would you say that's a fair assumption?
I would say that's a fair assumption. And we may actually have data on that. I can't find on the fly here, but let me see if I can dig that up and I can send that out to the board.
Yeah.
I've seen something with tiers on it, but I'd have to find it.
I wanted to just share that in working with staff, we do believe that a portion, and perhaps not an insignificant portion, of these folks that are in arrears are those frequent late payers, the ones that were noted that often are late. And we do have a segment of our rate base that relies on reminder notices.
Yeah.
They typically pay every time, but when they get the second notice.
Yeah.
So there is a piece of this, the longer we go on, and staff isn't trying to rush this, but just kind of factually, or at least what we believe, the longer we go on, this grows because people aren't getting those reminders and aren't getting pushes, and we're kind of inadvertently causing a problem for folks that may have paid had they been reminded.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
I appreciate that. And to be clear, I am not suggesting that we should not move forward with the reminders. I'm saying we should not move forward with shutoffs, which is a different thing.
understood. And we
Okay.
weren't really, we talked a lot, is it early even to bring this presentation? It was just to share with the board our thinking and get feedback. It will be, you know, as we start, right, hopefully in the next few months, see the economy return and the pandemic get under control. Of course, we couldn't proceed to terminations now until the governor terminates his order, not allowing it. But the board will be faced with the point in time. So we're just really bringing this to start those discussions. And as things begin to shift, we'll be coming back to the board, trying to zero in on what are the right things to be re-implementing based on the conditions in our service area and on the survey we get from the customers.
Yeah, I think that's fine. And then I have a question for Molly. What's the legal process issue here? I think Chuck sort of alluded to it, but can you clarify?
Sure, I can, Director. The issue that Chuck was pointing out was that the district code actually has a pretty explicit, very explicit limitation on the term of the payment plan authorized by the district code. And so it's really the equal dignities theory that says you know, if you have an ordinance, you can modify an ordinance by an ordinance. If you have a resolution, you could modify by a resolution. So it's my perception at this point that it would require action by the board by ordinance, which is not, it's not a big deal. It can be done. It's just the process.
Oh, okay, fine. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I don't see an issue there. I mean, if we want to extend the repayment to 24 months, which might be, you know, helpful to some people, I think you're right.
Yes, and just to clarify, Director, I mean, it can be done in a myriad of ways, of course. You could you could modify the code overall, or you could just add a specific provision, one-time provision to address this situation. So there's
Okay.
latitude there. It's just about how we do it.
Okay, great. That doesn't seem like that big a deal to me. Okay, so the plan here then is, Chuck, is for you guys to come back with something more specific. At what point in time are you looking to make? Because it does seem to me that, to Ben's point, that, you know, getting out some gentle, friendly reminders, you know, sooner rather than later might not be a bad idea, especially if we do that in conjunction with the survey that Jeannie's putting together. So I guess the question is, you know, what's your timing for moving forward?
Well, I think we'll take the feedback we got from today and think about it. And I'd imagine, you know, around the first of the year or so would probably be, I mean, hopefully, right, would be the right time to be coming back to the board with a more explicit recommendation as to the timing, and likely, or at least what we'll take, I imagine, we'll reflect when we bring it back, the idea of thinking about perhaps collections distinct from termination as we face this.
Right.
Okay.
I think we're about a year ahead of ourselves, Ben. I think if this conversation was November of 21, it would be, your January guess would be accurate. I don't see the rush. I think, I mean, just look at the situation that's happening today with, you know, what is it, 145,000 new cases. I mean, the numbers I'm hearing are we're going to be at 250,000 cases, which means 1 million new infections every 4 days. So I think that to think of normalization of the economy, it's at least at the end of 2021, just FYI. That's my opinion.
I appreciate that. I was just thinking perhaps we'd be bringing something along the lines of collections. You know, if I chose, because I'm not getting reminders and I just ignore the water bill, I mean, in a way, we're doing some customers a disservice not going through that process, and all of a sudden there are 2,000 or 3,000 in arrears. That's the nuance piece, but I appreciate the comment.
We get more hostility in attempting to collect it if they've assumed we've already written it off and we forgot about it. And I think they have to be reminded that the debt is there and eventually it will be paid. Yeah.
Well, I add this, Jack, to that. My wife is on the board of our HOA, and it's a voluntary payment for our HOA, and it's like $50 is what's suggested. She was tasked with calling up a number of our neighbors and saying, you know, hey, you haven't paid your HOA, and a couple were very hostile.
Yeah.
You know, my husband got laid off. I'm the only working person. You know, I think you're being overly generous on why they're not paying. I think it's much more fundamental economics than it is a habit. And, you know, Ben, you can argue, I think, that the ones who habitually are late are also stressed economically, that it's not just that they're disorganized or unwilling to pay it. It's they're unable to pay it. And then something happens where they get the money and then they pay it, as opposed to, you know, just not getting around to it. But it could well be, you're right. I mean, it could well be that, you know, we're undoubtedly one of the smallest bills people get. And, you know, you just set it aside. It's like lawyer bills, huh, Jack? You know, they go to the bottom of the stack, right? You know,
not mine.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say we have one public comment.
Okay, great. Let's hear it.
It's me again. Can you hear me?
We do hear you,
yes,
Roger.
sir. Loud and clear.
I think it's important to be flexible. And an additional comment is that we don't know the split between those accounts which are business and those which are residential. And if it's the business side, that's a quarter of the number of accounts, you need to treat them differently than you do for a residential account. So you have to be flexible, and you need to really work with the the people that are delinquent.
Thank you, Roger. And I think we absolutely agree with you. That was the reason that, that I was talking about doing the survey of the people who are delinquent so that we understand who they are and what their circumstances are. I think we do know, however, the difference between residential and commercial accounts, don't we, Chuck?
We do. So the total commercial accounts, of that about 61,000 accounts, 3,082 of those are commercial accounts. And of those, we have total delinquencies of 133, so about 4%.
So not
So
too much.
That'd be
but
133 out of that 2,750 total.
right.
So it's about the same,
So
about the
Jeannie,
same percentage.
Right.
in the survey, you'll want to survey those two groups separately. I think
Okay.
the commercial, I mean, there will be some overlap, but you'll want to survey the commercial folks differently than the residential.
Makes
The
sense.
issues will be different. But I am glad to hear that I'm never glad to hear anybody's delinquent and people are struggling. That's always terrible. But I'm glad that the commercial situation isn't worse than it might have been in light of everything. Okay. Any further conversation on this topic? Okay, and I think we've heard all the public comments on it.
That's
Then
correct.
there's nothing else. I think we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.